When I was around 11 years old, my family and I had just moved from Tennessee to Texas as my dad was working out a deal for a new job. My brother and I were homeschooled at this time, which meant we could move in with my aunt and uncle with no problems relating to finding a house in a good school district. My family was pretty close back then, and all of the cousins got along just fine. We loved to do everything together, especially me and my cousin Peyton. My immediate family, meaning me, mom, dad, brother, and sister, had spent the past 7 years without a Jack in the Box. It was terrible. We were all born in Texas, so we loved it, but living in Tennessee, we had to go without it. One particular night, however, all of our parents had gone out to dinner and told us very specifically to not leave the house. We were to lock the doors after they left and play games or something. After the parents left, all of the cousins got together, and we decided that we wanted ice cream and candy. Not that it is important, but I remember Ben & Jerry's being the main target. So we devised a foolproof plan to sneak out and acquire the goods. Well, we thought it was foolproof. My older sister, Driver, my cousin Peyton, and I all loaded into my dad's car that was left at the house, and off we were to get the food. We should not have even left. On our way to the store to get the snacks, we decided that Jack in the Box sounded much better than some sugar, so off we went. As we pulled up to the drive-thru, we decided that it was about 3 cars too long, and that we would just go inside and order instead. Wrong choice. When we stepped inside, there was one girl in the restaurant. She was short with a small figure and wearing winter clothes, so she looked completely ready for an outing. The girl asked the cashier for a water cup and proceeded to fill it with either Sprite or some other soda. I remember the guy at the register looking at her extremely confused, but it was late at night and he could not care less, I'm sure. When she finished filling up her cup, she drank it extremely quickly and started to turn around to throw the cup out and leave. I have an awful memory, but I do remember her eyes being wide open as if she had seen something scarring. At this point, we had been standing at the entrance doors for the entire interaction just watching. For whatever reason. We were just very nosy. But as she is walking out, I looked down and noticed that she was gripping a large butcher's knife. Immediately my heart dropped and I heard my cousin go, "Oh my God, no way, no way, no way," or something like that. So the knife-wielding girl leaves the restaurant and we go on to order our food, talking about it to the guy at the register and kind of laughing it off, but also still very curious and confused. As we leave with our food, we see the girl crossing the street to the CVS. Now, it was kinda late, but there were still a good number of cars driving on this road at the time. She did not look either way, just crossed with ease as if invincible. We brushed it off and assumed she was just doing her own thing, but after a while of eating some tacos and talking about how fun it was to be out without permission, we saw maybe a dozen police lights start to enter the CVS parking lot. Like I said before, we were nosy, so we decided to do what any nosy person does: investigate. We drove over to the CVS and we were stopped in the parking lot by an officer to be asked a couple of questions. My memory gets a bit hazy here, but I remember it was a problem because my cousin and I were both minors at the time. Or something about being minors and involving ourselves with the police was a problem. They asked us a couple of questions, and I just remember my sister and cousin explaining that we had seen a girl wielding a knife in the Jack in the Box across the street. So with that, they let us go. And we hurried back home. A little bit later that night, when everyone, parents included, was winding down for bed, our mothers called the 3 of us into one of the rooms in the house to talk about something. I don't think any of us realized that they knew what they did. They sat us down and calmly asked us what we did tonight, and I think we lied, but I don't quite remember. Either way, it was useless, because they knew everything, even what we did not know. Our moms told us that someone on Facebook had posted about 3 heroic girls that knew information about the girl in the situation that I am about to explain to you. Heroic? Hardly. All we did was answer a few questions. Nosy? That's more like it. They told us that the girl had entered the CVS and grabbed a woman by the hair and proceeded to hold the knife to her throat for several minutes before the police could show up. Apparently, people had tried to get her off, but it was useless. After all, she had the weapon. The girl was also apparently screaming and just being very violent, but as that was so many years ago, I can't remember much detail. To this day, I think about how easily it could have been one of us with a knife to the throat in a Fort Worth Jack in the Box, or how easily someone could have been killed. But also, if it wasn't for the girl, we would have gotten through that night with our foolproof plan. Also, we never got candy or ice cream, only PTSD. My cousin and I now laugh about this all the time and refer to it as our witness protection program moment. About 2.5 years ago, in March 2013, my dad, brother, and I went on a camping trip to Guadalupe Mountains and Carlsbad Caverns National Parks. We rented a minivan and drove from our house in Mississippi all the way to Carlsbad, New Mexico, where we camped at an RV park near the national park. Now keep in mind that we weren't backpacking. All of the hikes we planned were day hikes. We didn't carry enough food or water in our car to comfortably spend the night anywhere other than our campsite. About 3 days into the trip, we decided to go on a 14-mile day hike. With no packs, 14 miles in one day should be doable. However, this particular hike was much more difficult than we expected, with several huge elevation gains. Needless to say, we got finished with this hike at about dusk. We finished the hike, exhausted, and shuffled into the parking lot. At this point, our van was the only car in the parking lot. We got in the rental van and began the 45-minute drive back to the campsite. The road from the parking lot to the main highway was a lot longer than I remembered, and it took us about 5 minutes of driving to get back to the highway. When we got to the highway, the gate leading onto it was locked. We were greeted by a sign saying that we had stayed in the day use area too long. We must call the sheriff's office using the payphone back at the trailhead so they could come let us out. We drove back to the trailhead, and the payphone was dead. The cell phone reception was terrible, so we decided to slowly drive back to the gate by the highway and check for cell phone service along the way. As we were slowly driving down this paved road, we saw 2 silver sedans slowly tailing us. Although it wasn't quite dark, their lights were on, so we saw them from a good distance away. The weird part is that we were stopping and going and changing speed, but these 2 sedans kept roughly the same distance behind us. We got back to the gate and checked out the area. There was a barbed wire fence stretching through the desert as far as the eye could see, keeping us in. We noticed that these 2 cars had turned around and headed back to the parking lot, so we decided to go back to the parking lot as well and see if their cell phones worked or if they knew another way out. The cars crested a hill, and that's the last we ever saw of them. It was pretty dark by this point, and we didn't see any lights in the distance. There were no service roads, and there were no dust clouds that these cars would have left if they had decided to trailblaze through the desert. When we got back to the trailhead parking lot, there were no cars there. They had simply disappeared. Seeing as we didn't have enough food or water to stay the night in our car, we decided something must be done. We drove back to the gate and got out and looked around. My brother found a place where the barbed wire had been repaired, so we were able to loosen it, pull it apart, drive through, and fix the fence back behind us. We raced back to the campsite, thoroughly freaked out by these mysterious cars. The rest of the trip went great, but every time we passed that fence, we just got creeped out. As we were driving home at the end of the week, we were alone on the deserted highway in the early morning. We saw 2 silver sedans behind us, keeping a constant distance. We stopped at a gas station, and when we got back on the highway, we never saw them again. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a relatively small town in Texas in a small house with my mom. My mom has always had a very caring heart for those in need. So when my uncle called her one night and told her he ran into a homeless girl at the local park, my mom offered to help her out for a day or so just to get her back on her feet. That sort of thing. When the girl arrived at my house, she said her name was Laura. Laura told us she was 16 at the time. She seemed like a shy girl. When my mother asked what she was doing out on the streets, Laura told us she had been kicked out of her home by her mom because her mom had accused her of sleeping with her boyfriend. Laura told us that allegation wasn't true. She told us her mother's boyfriend was the one who came on to her. My mom gave Laura a place to sleep in the guest bedroom that night. The next day, after breakfast, Laura asked to use my mom's house phone to call her mom to see if she could get some of her things from her mom's house. Laura's mom never answered the phone, and we felt bad for her. As a 10-year-old girl, I couldn't imagine what she must have been going through. Later that day, I remember watching TV in the living room and minding my own business. But I could feel someone staring at me, so I turned my head where I felt the gaze. Laura was sending me a glare so cold that if looks could kill, I would have dropped dead. I was confused and a little startled. I turned my head away from her quickly and went back to watching TV, but I could still feel Laura's cold gaze. I couldn't understand what I had done to her to cause her to look at me with such hate. The next day it happened once more. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I could feel someone looking at me. I turned my head to the side and saw Laura's head peering around the corner at me. Her eyes were dark and laced with hatred. It frightened me, and I felt so confused as to why she was looking at me like this. I didn't want to cause any trouble, so I didn't bring up Laura's death glares to my mother at all. Later that night, my uncle had joined us for dinner. He had stopped by to see how everything was with Laura, and if we had any luck finding her a place to live with one of her family members. After dinner, I was washing my plate in the sink when I heard a loud growling sound come from the dining room. I turned my head to see Laura shaking and growling like some sort of wild animal. My mom and uncle looked disturbed and worried. Laura threw herself onto the floor and began thrashing around and screaming as if she were possessed. I was absolutely terrified. It was a scary thing to witness. I grew up very religious. My mom and uncle began praying out loud for Laura while I ran to my room and closed the door. This went on for 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity of horror. I could hear Laura screaming like a madwoman and growling like some sort of deranged beast. I don't think any of us knew exactly what was going on. After my mom and uncle had prayed for Laura for what felt like forever, Laura told us she was free from an evil demon that had taken over her. None of us were sure what had caused her behavior. None of us were sure what had even happened. I peeked my head out of my room to see Laura smiling happily while she curled up on the couch with a blanket. Her eyes opened, and she shot a cold glare at me. I quickly closed my bedroom door in fear. I placed a chair in front of my bedroom door and went to sleep. I woke up the next morning by my mom waking me up. She told me that she was taking me out to eat at my favorite restaurant. When I asked her if Laura was going, she gave me a serious expression and spoke. "Your uncle is going to take Laura back to her mom's house. He slept on the couch last night after what happened. He and I were talking when the two of you had gone to sleep, and we pieced together that Laura made the entire performance up last night. She said, 'She is not stable, and we think she's dangerous.'" As I heard my mother say those words, relief washed over me. I got dressed and went to the car to go to the restaurant with my mom. When we got into the car, we saw Laura and my uncle getting in his truck with her. Laura looked angry. Her expression was of a child's when you don't give them what they want. She got into my uncle's car, and they drove away. I'm 22 now, and I have never forgotten about this horrific incident that happened in my life years ago. After that day, I never saw Laura or heard anything else about her ever again.